mid-1970s. Okay? This is what the yard looked like in the fall. The second weekend in October, pumpkins started appearing in the front yard. You can see the garage in the background. About the time this picture was taken, Greenbrier started the fire department and fire trucks were stored in there. Go ahead. This is the field, or part of the field, where the pumpkins would come from. They all were picked by hand and brushed off. And here we're loading a truck in the backyard, and the truck would be loaded today, and it would be delivered the next day to a stand, and come home and load the truck again to be delivered the next day to the stand. And an early picture of unloading the pumpkins in the front yard. And more unloading when we pass through the generations. This is a crew. This is 1976. Harry and Evelyn, Kevin and Mark, my husband, and our first son, Aaron, and he started early. All three of my kids put tape on the pumpkins with the price, and when they were little, they'd go behind them and take the basket they bought. Go ahead. The school, bringing schools in beginning in 1971 became an important part of life here. By this particular year, which is 1982, we had 4 classes that day. The kids could buy a pumpkin. I think this year they were a dime. That's my middle child, Brent, collecting the money for the pumpkins. Go on. Another big thing, and unfortunately we can't see this very well, is Grandpa made a pumpkin that was made, the face was all out of vegetables. And here the hair is cabbage, the ears are peppers, and the nose is a carrot, the mouth is a string bean. And on this particular one, the eyes are part of a kohlrabi. But every 3-4 days, depending upon how warm it was and how fast the pumpkin was rotting, he made a new one. Then we always had pumpkins that were not usable or sellable. And so he would have my 2 sons make faces out of these, and these pumpkins are not in good shape, okay? The uglier the pumpkin were, and people would come and buy these. So this is Harry out talking to one of the classes, and this particular day it was kind of unnerving. Arlene Brown was helping, and she had my daughter in 1989 in the house. She was getting her lunch. And I went in, so Arlene could go out to the stand and I could help with the classes, because sometimes the questions that the kids would ask, like, you know, you only plant 1 seed, but you get 100 seeds in a pumpkin. Why don't you have to plant 100 seeds? Well, the question would not always come out the way they wanted it, so I translated for Grandpa. Anyway, Grandpa had taken my daughter out and had her sitting among the kids while he was talking to them about how to plant seeds and how you hold and what you had to do to produce the pumpkin crop. And this went on until 1991. Go ahead. A shot of the garages. Here the city garage is there on the other side of this one, and we're looking up towards this building here. This is Harry and Evelyn's 50th wedding anniversary with their attendant, Helen Braden. And this is Phyllis's wedding to Neil Vest in 1981. Jim, Lily, and Moran were related to, had relatives in England. And that would be Carl and Babs sitting there in the middle. and they came here. And this is a picture of Donnie, Rogers, and Phyllis, and must be
His wife, Delia, is Donnie's
down
wife.
at the bottom.
Yeah.
And then there's Marion,
And Lil.
well, Aunt Lillian, and Carl and Babs, and Evelyn, Marion, and Harry.
And Carl was really interesting because the Eden Prairie Chamber of Commerce got a letter from him that I've got made a copy of. But Carl wrote a letter because he was coming back to the United States because he wanted to find out where he was born. Because he was actually born here in Eden Prairie, but then his parents and him went back to England. So he wanted to come, and he didn't have many names, he didn't have much of anything, but what's really interesting is I talked before about whether we have a big grandpa of John Albert Rogers or Albert John Rogers, because in the letter he writes, he said, and my relative Albert came to Eden Prairie. So it's those things that keep you thinking about, you know, well, what, huh? But given names and go-by names were different at that point in time.
Yes, and Harry was always called Harry, but his given name was Henry, so he did
Same
legally
thing.
change it.
Yeah. That Carl was here when Dick and Toby Rogers' daughter was married, and so he and Babs went with us to the wedding, and he was very military, and when I'd introduce him to someone, he put his heel and kind of bowed. So it was fun to have him. I had everybody over to the house, and it was great.
Yeah, it was interesting.
When Princess died, he was very old, but they allowed him to sit in a chair until the car carrying her was just within a short distance, and they said then he stood as the car passed and then sat in. This is Cedar Ridge. BFI wanted to put another dump in Eden Prairie, and they wanted to put it on this parcel of land that Harry owned, and he didn't want to do that. But it was getting to a point where they could have some say, and so he went to Jerry McCoy and said, I'll sell you this land below market price if you'll build a school. So this was a big deal. He did sell to the school. He had some conditions. There had to be kids at the groundbreaking. So we built a road so that the school buses could drive in. Go ahead. And here's some groundbreaking. Go to the next one. It's a wider shot. And Harry, Norbert, my husband Alan, myself, our two sons, John. I can't see sideways, Mike.
Neil is over here.
Yeah, Neil's on the left, and I think you're next to him, and Phyllis. Okay. Everybody was given a shovel and encouraged to dig a hole. So these are all the kids digging the holes. My grandfather loved that.
What year was that?
1988.
After we came home from her 100th birthday and Bill's, then my dad said to me, you know, that was really nice, wasn't it? And it was summer, you know. And he said, you know, when I turn 100, that's what I want to do. We'll put a big tent out on December 26th. So I let him plan it, and I think I might still have some of the notes from that.
This is Lillian Rogers' 100th birthday. Okay.
That would have been done.
Chris.
Excuse me, for those who aren't family, has anybody explained who Lillian is or where she lives?
Do you want to? Or do
No,
you
go
want
ahead.
to? Okay. Lillian and Jim Rogers lived over on Duck Lake Trail
Duck Lake Road,
on Duck Lake Road.
in the corner.
And Jim would have been one of John's
Cousins,
First-
nephews,
nephews.
excuse, yeah, nephews.
nephews,
Yeah.
okay. So that's how they fit
We're
in.
related, but distantly, but yeah, but still the Rogers name.
But when it was your parents and your grandfather, they were all, you know,
Pretty close?
very close.
Okay,
Yeah.
Everybody went to everything.
okay.
Then a Christmas tree for Harry was very important. We started out with the tree behind the stand. And I'm sure there's a lot of us who have horror stories to tell about this. Christmas tree went on Thanksgiving evening, and it would go on every morning between 4 and 4:30 in the morning until the sun rose. And it would come on at dusk and stand until midnight. And the last night it would run was on New Year's Day. So at midnight, New Year's Day, he didn't turn it on anymore. Putting the tree up when it was behind the stand was not bad. We used ladders, we used extension hooks and rods. When we moved out on the corner, we had the pickup with an 36-foot extension ladder and a rod. This particular year, we had a ring where we hooked it up on top. Harry did not like how high I was getting it up on top of the tree. I don't like heights when I'm up the ladder. So he decides to move the truck, and he pulls the truck forward, which sent the ladder leaning back, and there's electrical wires there. So I let go and came down in front of the truck, and I went home. And Bert stopped because he saw what was going on, and he said he'd take care of it. And he did for many years, and Mike will tell you why they.
Well, then as the years went on, as that tree kept getting taller and taller and taller, we enlisted the help of George Marshall, because he had a Ford tractor that had a bucket on it, okay? So we took the ladder, and stuck it in the bucket, we tied 2 ropes on back down to the bucket. So now here's this ladder in this tractor. So I'm in the bucket, so now we raise the bucket up as high as that'll go, and then the ladder's sticking out from there up towards the top of the tree. So as I'm climbing it, it's, you know, it's roped, you know, it's tied with rope. Well, rope isn't real, you know. And before we went up there, I said, well, how am I gonna hook these on the top of the tree? Oh, well, I don't know. So I ran to the hardware store and got pipe hangers, plumber's pipe hangers, the plastic things, and we tied the string of lights on that, so that I got all the way to the top of the tree. I could just hook it around the tree. And I came down off of there after it was done, and I thought, you know, that has got to be the dumbest ass thing I have ever done in my entire life. And I told my dad, I said, we're done. I'm not doing that, you're not doing that, we'll figure something out next year. But we did have the lights that year. And I don't know how many.
That was the last year.
That was the last year? Sorry, I broke a tradition.
Yeah. No, because he died after.
Oh, okay, alrighty, so.
The other thing
It was
would be
interesting.
with the tree is that if he didn't turn them on, we lived just a mile up the road, people would stop and tell me that the tree wasn't on, there must be something wrong. Or they would call me when they get to work. So 5:15 in the morning, my phone is ringing. Or if some of the strings and the lights were off, they'd call me.
Yeah.
He was up, I don't know why they didn't call him. Okay, one of the things my grandfather enjoyed doing with my children was making a bunny cake, and we had done this on Thursday before he died, so this is the last one he was involved in. We did have a hard time, they ate most of the jelly beans before they got there. And here is the last formal picture taken of Harry. It was for Pax Christi. He was very proud. He had belonged to 4 Catholic Church, St. Hubert's in Chanhassen, St. Mary's, where his daughter Phyllis went to school, Immaculate Heart of Mary in Glen Lake, and had been part of the group that went to St. Paul on numerous occasions to have a Catholic church built here in Edenprairie. Evelyn, his wife, was one of the first buried from Pax Christi. which he was very thankful for. But that's it.
Oh, wonderful.
I will tell you, when this picture here was taken, you guys have all seen this. This is my daughter, who is 30 today. He wanted to have a picture of this buried with him. So we had a picture made up. The pumpkins were really part of his life. And there are two of John and Tilly's children that still deal with farming. One is Paul Rogers. He is John Rogers, Rollins' oldest son.
Son.
Would be Rollins' grandson. He farms in Waconia. And then my daughter, Jennifer, who is finishing up a PhD in soil, air, and something science. And right now, even today, she's out working in her urban gardens.
The other thing about Harry too is that Harry was another grandpa, big grandpa who also was involved. Was on not only the town board for 30 years and the school board for many years, but also Harry was on the school board here in Eden Prairie for many years. The other thing.
Grandpa wouldn't retire unless my dad would run.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yeah.
Big grandpa
He wanted
wouldn't.
something to do
Yeah.
with the school.
And then of course, when they did, when Big Grandpa retired didn't actually retire from the town board. The town board was 86 in regards to having a mayor-council government in Eden Prairie, so that was why his tenure there ended. But they also showed the garages. Well, what's also very interesting is that there was 2 stalls to that garage, and when the fire department formed in '69, the first fire truck they had no building for it, and Harry was gracious enough to allow the fire department to store that truck in his garage for probably about almost a year and a half, 2 years, I think, until their first fire station was built.
When my dad was elected to the school board, I was in grade school, but then when I was in high school, I got expelled because the basketball team was allowed to go to a tournament in Mound, which they were not playing in. And we thought if the boys could go, we could go. So there was 5 of us girls, and we went home to my mom and to Beulah's mother, Ella Moran, and we got money and jackets, and we went up to Mound on the bus, the Greyhound bus that Elmer Moran drove. He dropped us off in Mound, but we got back on the bus and said, we decided we'll go downtown Minneapolis and we'll come back on your 11 o'clock run. Whatever you girls want to do. So we went to Cafe de Napoli and a movie and back. And when we went to school the next morning, 5 girls were expelled from school. And my dad's on the school board, my mother provided all the money and jacket. And so, but when all we had to do to get back in, they didn't want us to miss any classes, so they assigned these long themes. And when I had to go to class, your grandpa, Bert, would write on my theme, and later I typed it off, but he helped me. Bert and I were like this when we went to school. So.
Yeah, and then you went a couple years to school at St. Mary's at the Catholic school in Shakopee.
Yeah, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And came back to Eden Prairie, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, no, so. Roger, you wanna stay right where you are?
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Is this about where we were?
Yeah, that'll start right there, yep.
Then I gotta go find this, all right.
Oops.
I understand.
Oh, there, you went too far back up. There.
All right. You can read it all.
Okay,
I'm gonna be-
yeah, well, Helen, we're gonna play off each other a little bit. Helen was was the oldest of the two girls from the Rogers household. She remembers her hard work, keeping up with the cooking and feeding of the family and the hired help. Grandma John, great-grandma John also had hired help quite often, and it sounded like there could be 1 to 2 to 3 individuals, and also maybe an individual, a lady in helping in the kitchen also. But the girls were always especially helpful around the kitchen, getting vegetables from the garden, all that sort of stuff. Also, Helen remembers that them building the house that she would spend most of her adult life in later on, which would have been the house just up here, just up around the corner. So, go ahead.
That's their wedding picture, 1923. And that's Jerome, and that is Alice, I believe, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So that was the beginning of their marriage. And I think
Know
they
how they met.
met, I think, they met my dad was a carpenter.
Yep.
And he was building a barn or something like that maybe for John, I think.
Yeah.
And that's how they got connected, and, you know,
They were born in, they got married in 23. That would have been, okay, no,
Yeah.
it wouldn't have been the fixing of that barn, but yeah.
and that's how they met anyway. They were, you know, he was carpenter and he was building and she was on the farm there, and then somehow they met
Yeah,
in that time period there, so, that was the beginning of their journey, and this is the, 5 of us kids on the first day of school. I think it was probably my first day of school, maybe first grade. It was Dale, Jean, Ace, or Stanley, and Norma.
Yep.
In front of our house, that was the old green house that stood up on the corner there, or stood up on the road, Pioneer Trail.
And go on, that's all really, I didn't have a whole lot from that, but, you stayed around Eden Prairie for, your mom stayed her whole life.
Yeah,
You guys grew up, what was going on with your family then?
well, our family there, Ace, he built a house down in the corner of the lot down there
Yep.
on their property, and then, just Jean, Norma got married Bill Quam. They lived down on the Spring Road, like to go down toward the Lion's Cap on top of the hill up there before you got down to the spring.
Yep.
They had the 4 children, and then Jean got married later. She was like in her 30s when she got married to a guy by the name of Gary Scruton. Wonderful brother-in-law. Couldn't have got a better brother-in-law than that. Dale was married and he lived in several places. He lived in Glen Lake for a while, and Bush Lake, and then the Eden Prairie. So he moved around a bit. And myself, I lived in Eden Prairie until I was 27. And then after 27, I moved to Excelsior. Joan and I were married then about 3 years, I think. The first couple of years that we were married, I stayed on the farm because the other ones are all married, and I was there to take care of my mom and dad weren't in good health, so I stayed there running the farm for a couple of years. And then from then on, I went on to work for Red Owl in about 1956, I think it was.
Okay.
So, I stayed there for 30-some years, 32 years, working for Red Owl.
So it's interesting also how our families, how though our families kind of split to a degree, but they stayed fairly close together. On great grandma's John or Rollins farm, the Gessler farm originally, Norm's dad, when he got married, they built a house down on the property on the front end of that parcel.
Sure.
And that's the house that Dale and his first wife Marilyn lived in for many, many, many years.
Yeah.
Again, gone now. But it's real interesting. Roger was also telling me, Nancy was talking about how our family's still tied up in agriculture to a degree, and she talked about my cousin Paul in Waconia. And Roger was telling me how one year he won a DeKalb belt buckle because he had the best per bushel acreage corn that year. He got 93 bushel an acre.
90 or 97 bushel.
97 bushel of
Yeah.
corn, and I laughed because I didn't laugh. I was just amazed because right now my cousin in his farming, they shoot for 200. That's what they shoot for is 280 bushel per acre. So you can see how the agriculture has changed over the years also to a degree that's just amazing to all of us. So.
Okay.
It is amazing what's happened over the past, we got a little bit about, when, Mom was, born on the Douglas farm, I believe. And then she talked a lot to, about going to Chanhassen, which we covered before, but walking the distance, you know, in the cool days and stopping at the Folly House to get warm, and then going into St. Hubert's and Chanhassen. And then she said all the, girls had to go in, empty the waste baskets and sweep the, schoolhouse there, and keep the chalkboards clean, and the boys had to go out and split wood, and bring in wood and start the fire. And that was their job, and she could name off sister so-and-so and father so, and she had it all in her head, everybody by name, you know, and what they did, and it was just amazing to listen to her sometimes, that how she had that memory, that long-term memory was just like, right on. So that was one of her things, and one of the, cute things about her, she said, you know, I only have a birthday once every 7 years. I said, well, how does that work? You know, she said, that's only once every 7 years. Well, I said, Mom, you gotta have one every year. No, it's once every 7 years. Well, she was born on Thanksgiving Day, on the 24th. And I guess the way the calendar worked, every 7 years, Thanksgiving came on the 24th. So that was it.
Oh, okay.
Thanksgiving,
Because she's born on Thanksgiving Day, and if it's not on the 27th, I ain't having no birthday.
Right, and when it came on the 24th, that was her birthday, that was 7 years later. So she
Oh.
didn't get old very fast that way.
There you go. Oh, that's
Yeah, that was good
unbelievable.
the way she had that thought out.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, could I have a little light here, maybe look just at that part, I'm gonna see what I got.
I'll get it. Oh, thanks, Nance.
Well, this picture was taken about the time we went to Shakopee too,
When you guys went, yeah.
yeah, when we went,
Yeah, this was the first year, I think I went to Eden Prairie for a year,
yeah.
and then later on we went to
It
Shakopee.
was, Norbert and Norman and
Yeah.
Jean and Dale.
Yeah, I'll get that all
and
covered.
the
here.
Hibbon
Talk
girl.
about that, yeah.
I got that all covered in there, yeah. And, well, they were born, like I said, and they lived in Chaska. My dad and mother lived in Chaska for about 3 years or so before they moved out to Eden Prairie. Then my dad became farming instead of doing the carpenter. And when I look back on his life, he was a good farmer, but I think he would have been a better carpenter. He was a master in carpenting, he just loved it, you know, and he did a lot of odd jobs around chicken houses and and milk houses and stuff like that. He built garages for different people, but he was pretty handy with the tools you had in those days.
Right.
He was a good carpenter. So, when we were children, I think of a time that we went to St. Mary's, and I was in, I think, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade I went there. And there was, I think it was probably 8 or 9 of us in a car. You can imagine that, like a 1930 model car, whatever, 34, 38, or whatever year it was. But getting all of us in the car, we were double-decked in there like it was just unbelievable. And they all took turns. Your mother would drive, and then Aunt Marion would drive, and then my mother would drive, and then Arnie Hannon would drive. So they rotated days to take us to Shakopee and back, you
Yeah.
know.
So,
And I can remember when we'd be piling out of the bus by the school in Shakopee there. Kids would
car.
be teasing us, I'd get my out of the car, but it's like, you know, you couldn't
It's
believe
like
it.
a clown car.
Yeah.
Piling on out.
You can get in the Volkswagen, you know, it was like that. And the kids would laugh, they said, you're gonna break the springs in that car, they're gonna laughing at us, you know, and we just kept coming out of there. But it was fun, I mean, it was time that, I remembered well.
yeah,
It was just a good time at that, in my life anyway. And the nuns always over there, okay, if you don't behave, you're gonna see Father McGrath. You see Father McGrath, and you're in trouble. Well, you got to know Father McGrath, he wouldn't say boo to anybody. They used that as a threat to keep us in line, you know, it's funny how that worked. But anyway, in the fall, I remember my parents, my dad would butcher. He'd either butcher pork or beef or something like that. And then in that old greenhouse we had out there, in the back bedroom, there was never any vent or any heat vent to go back in there, so that was like a walk-in freezer back there. That was never used, that back bedroom. And my dad had big, you call white paper, he laid the meat down on there and he'd cut off the meat and butcher, you know, just so you knew what he was doing with that. So that's what we did, and we had meat all winter long, and we would break.
In your bedroom.
Right in the bedroom, the back bedroom, yeah. And in the spring of the year, my mother would can the meat. When it got start to get warm, we'd have to take it out there and she'd be canning meat. We had the basement full of quart jars of meat, you know, canned meat, so that was one of the things that we did to survive. And then I can remember my dad when I was pretty small yet, and he had a trailer and he hooked it on the back of the car and he'd load up the grain and the corn and the wheat and that, and my mother would haul it over to Shakopee and they'd unload it and they'd grind it and they'd load it back up her and then she'd bring it back home.
Yep.
That was for the cows, you know, but my mother was in there always doing something. She wasn't the kind of lady that liked to stay in the house that much. She loved the outdoors. That was her thing. The house that was okay, but she just didn't bother with it that much. But what she loved was the animals, the vegetables, and the flowers, and the stuff that she could do out there. That was just, that was her,
My
that was her
dad.
cup of tea, yeah. Yeah. And I do remember the times when we'd come home from school, and there's the dining room table, a huge dining room table would be just piled up with cookies. She baked cookies all day. And we were allowed two. We snuck a third one if we could do it. But anyway, and then when she was baking bread, we had what we call shoe leathers. Remember those?
Mm-hmm.
And when the bread was rising, she'd pull it off of there and put it in hot grease, like with lard, really. Well, it had bacon lard on the stove, and boil that. It'd get brown, and then put it in a brown paper bag and shake it with sugar, just like a big frosted donut, you know. And I remember you used to eat those with us all the time. She was like another member of the family.
Well, that was what, not to get you off track, but there's also in one of the other things that I read, two things that I read that I always thought was real remarkable is that Helen, in one of the articles that was in the paper, made mention of Harry being her favorite. Partially probably because they live so close together.
Yeah. Yeah.
But also in that article, my dad's commented in there about, and we always like to go to Helen's because there was always good cookies.
Yeah, that was one of the things that, she did a wonderful job of that. And, I think my mother too, she liked that out-of-doors stuff that, she always had a, sign nailed on a tree out there, you know, fresh eggs and chickens, you know, like that, and she had regular customers that come by all the time, and, they were pretty regular, and I remember one lady, it was a black lady that came out, and she'd send a card out in the mail, and she said, I'm gonna be up this coming Thursday, and I want 2 chickens, 2 dozen eggs, and she'd drive in with this big package, and she had a chauffeur, and he had white gloves and the whole bit, you know, and I just looked at it, and I never saw anything like this before, but that's what it was. For several years, that lady, he would come 4 or 5 times in the summer, and she'd come in the winter even. But every 2 or 3 weeks, she'd send a card in the mail, I'm gonna be out, and I want this. It was regular customers, and I think one of her favorite customers was, Eleanor Mondale, when she had vegetables, yeah. She said that Eleanor Mondale would come, and she just loved her, because she said, I could sit and talk to that lady all day. She says, she sits and talks to me, she said, she's the nicest lady, and that was just one of her highlights, that she could talk to Eleanor Mondale. That
Yeah.
was, I think they lived out around Lake Riley at the time, somewhere. But that was a highlight for her, you know, that, she could do that. I got to talk about the stuff that she did raise. Helen did raise beautiful gardens. She had the cauliflower. I think they were like as big as a soccer ball or whatever you call it. They were huge. And melons and the tomatoes and the flowers. That was her life. She'd spend the day out there in the garden, just working with that. Or that or working with the animals. She loved that too. So it's part of her life. See what we got here. Talk about that, yeah. mom was a, very strong woman. She was a very physically fit, very strong woman, and, in later years, the last 25 years after there was no cattle and that, she did all that work, and she was 88 years old, and she was still in the garden out there, doing her stuff, doing the cauliflower and the tomatoes and the whatever it was, so she was an amazing lady with that. And I have to think back of it, when you're thinking back about some of the highlight, or the funny stuff that happened over the years, I remember her, what was that, I was gonna think about, well, I lost the thought, the train of thought, but anyway, one thought I had was that when we were about 1940, when that Armistice Day storm came through, and that was the one that was really scary for us kids, because I can remember we could get to the garage, and to the chicken house, and to the corn crib, but then we couldn't get to the barn because of the snow was so deep. My dad got out there, and I had a sling rope from the barn to the corn crib. So when we came out to milk the cows, we go along the buildings, we got a hold of that sling rope, then we would follow that all the way to the barn. Because if you ever got lost, we were done, you know. So that's how we survived that. And then after that storm settled down, I remember Dale and I, my brother is a year, 2 years older than me, we put our boots on, we went hiking out back into the woods in that deep snow. And I think at that time, Art Miller had he was raising turkeys. It's never heard of in that part of the country at that time. But he had a big fence around his property, a big 6-foot fence, chain link fence, and he had turkeys in there. And when that snow got so deep, the turkeys walked out over the snow fence. So when Dale and I went back in our woods right behind there, Art Miller's property, there was turkeys sticking all over in those snowbanks, frozen to death. There was just feathers sticking up their heads, their feet. There was turkeys all over, frozen turkeys. He lost them all. It was just like something I'll never forget of it.
I imagine.
Yeah. So, I think that's pretty much what I can say with what kind of a mom she was. She was a great mom. She, the kind of mom that would, somebody in the neighborhood was sick, I think she was the first one with the hot dish, go down there and help them out. You know, she said, somebody's got the flu, or somebody's got this, or whatever. She was always there to do it. And, I think back now, when I'm at this age, I think back how hard they worked. You realize how hard they worked at that time to make things go, you know, when things are going back in the, we talked about in the 30s, in the mid-30s and that, and I remember that as kids. And I remember the cattle standing up on their back feet, and they put their front feet up in there, and they were eating the leaves off the trees for something to eat, but there just was nothing there.
Yeah,
So dry.
the 34 and 36 was so dry, those 2
I can
years,
remember
yeah.
that, yeah.
What your mother and dad ate, what about what the mother and your mother and dad ate and your kids got?
Oh, yeah, they told us one time, they said during that spell there that they had one month they had a $7 milk check. She said there was just nothing there, so she said, your dad and I ate oatmeal for a week, or a month, she said, for 1 month that check was that small, and you kids got the meat and whatever that was, or we ate the oatmeal, she said, to make it go around. So that was, it was pretty tight.
Yeah, it was during those years.
That along with everybody else is in the same boat.
Ronnie, do you remember between, it would be on the side of your mom's house going towards my dad's house, your mom raised some kind of fruit tree that wasn't a Minnesota tree. Was it a pear?
I don't remember that now.
Oh, I do.
Okay, yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, because she gave us, you know, she shared with Mom and Dad and I, and we were just thrilled to have that,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I don't remember that, maybe that was smaller.
Well, I remember a lot of things about your mom. Very
Spent a lot of
special.
time there, isn't it?
She was always up there, cause she was an only, and they had a big group, so
Oh,
she
yeah.
was up there
Oh,
all
yeah.
the time, and
Yeah.
it was like their sister.
Yeah.
And your sisters and I, we could mail in a dime, and they would send back, lipstick and stuff. So we'd have these beauty sessions.
Yeah.
So,
Unbelievable.
yeah, and, yeah, I especially remember your mom and your dad.
Yeah.
And your grandpa, Roland, was the best godfather in the whole world.
He was prone to the ladies, I think.
Yeah.
Lizzie got spoiled real bad, the only daughter.
Yeah.
She could get away with anything, I've been told.
Right. Well, I think the time when I went down, later when Grandpa John was getting older and he couldn't drive anymore, and he wanted me to take him on the truck and take him down to the farmer's market. I probably told you that story.
This is what I was gonna ask if you were gonna tell me.
Yeah, and anyway, we got down there, we're at the farmer's market down, he always says, I got a certain stall, I got the best stall in the place here, he said, they always tell me that. We were in there and people were coming through and there was three ladies coming down there, and he said, now, you watch, he said, they're trying to get the price down on my berries here, I got 3 boxes for a quarter or something like that they were, he said, they're gonna want them for 15 cents. You watch how you do this. So they came down there, and so they were looking at him, said, we'll give you 15 cents for them. I said, I can't do it, I can't do it. He said, well, that's all we can do is 15 cents. He said, no, he said, Tilly's been dead for 20 years.
Yeah.
He said, Tilly hasn't had a coat in 20 years, he said, and we just can't make, he said, there just is not enough to go around. He said, I've gotta get her a new coat and I can't cut that price. He said, I got the quarter, he said, hey.
It's gotta be one of the greatest
That's how you
stories.
do it, he says.
That's how you do it, so.
That about Daddy or Grandpa, about the Grandpa John stall was this John Rogers and Son after my dad started, and even until Daddy gave up that marketplace, it never changed. He never put
Never
his
changed
own
the
name
name up
on
there.
it. He was
He
just
was always the son, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, I'm gonna kinda speed things up here real quick, and we don't really need it. The last daughter was Alice, and Alice married Merrill Zell. When the Zells had the farm would have been on the south side of Red Rock Lake. So basically, kind of about where Mitchell Road comes north from Pioneer Trail, if you go straight down, that whole area right in there would have been the Zell's farm. And they moved, right after they got married, they moved to Center City. And that's kind of the last we've got of them. And both Helen and Alice, also their last children, both of them sons, were like 10 or 12 years after the child before, so there was a big span in there. And the only one of the Zell family that is left is that last son, and he doesn't remember a whole lot either about what's going on. And so,
When they first were married, they lived across the street from where we are now, and it was called Curls Woods, and it belonged to a rich family in Minnetonka. And Joe Zell, the oldest one, was born in my bedroom, and I was transported for like 2 months up to Aunt Helen, and so that Aunt Alice could stay there.
okay.
So,
Well, I'm gonna have to get more information from you, because I obviously don't have any of that, but like I said, that's why we've done these sort of things, is to try and pull us together a little bit and pull out the different stories. And I guess I've always been real interested in the intertwining of all of our relations, because, our family as a whole was this community to a degree. And that's why I look at what Roland did, I look at what Harry did, I look at what the girls did, and everything as being part of how this community thrived and how we all hung together to make it go forward, and how I guess I've been very lucky in that being instilled in me, from my dad with the school, with dad through the fire department, and then me with that and following in what he did and that sort of stuff, and staying in tune and staying still in this community and seeing where things go.
Pioneers.
Yeah, they were that and then some. Like I said, they've done some marvelous things in this world. I am sorry for those folks that used to say that we ran long, but hey, we're Rogers, we're long-winded, what are you gonna do, Yes,
Are you associated with the cemetery next door?
that's me.
That's you? How did that get started?
That was formed by 9 individuals in the community back in 1863, became the cemetery in 1864. that's one of the other things that the senior center is trying to get me to do, is one of these on the cemetery. You know, they're kind of twisting my arm a little bit, but I don't have as much old information that I want to do a good job yet, so I'm still working on stuff. But I also found out, because of this, I found out that there used to be an Eden Prairie, not an Eden Prairie paper, but there used to be a paper called the Hennepin County Review.
Yes.
And I need to go down to the State Historical Society and find out what years they have of that paper. Because that will tell me a lot about the cemetery in regards to deaths, because the only way you get information is through those last obituaries for
Right.
people. That's really the only way you find out a lot of stuff.
Do you have to be a resident of Eden Prairie to be buried there?
No. The cemetery is a nonprofit, non-denominational cemetery association. So anybody who owns burial rights there has the right to be buried there. We do charge different pricing in regards to whether you live in the community or you don't live in the community. We had a big influx a couple years ago from, we had a local cemetery over in Bloomington that decided to jack their prices up, so then when people bitched about how high their prices were, they sent them over to us, and that was like, wait a minute. We're not taking, you're not gonna cheap us out. That ain't gonna happen, so. But,
Can I tell you a story about
yes,
cemetery?
please.
My grand,
Yes.
Harry.
Harry ran the cemetery
for a lot of years.
a lot of years.
And so, we thought it was a windfall, my brother and I, because they used to pay us $50 to dig the grave and then refill it. You had to take half a ounce of the bulk fit.
Yep.
I unfortunately had to dig some graves of our cousins.
Yep.
I remember how sad Ace Drayson was, you know, when his son came home from
Vietnam.
Yeah, but it was such a remarkable thing to walk through that with my grandfather. And he would talk about every single grave, who it was, how it was related to me. I was just I don't know if you remember Jim Brown, real tall,
Yeah.
in my class.
Yeah.
We were up hiking in Arizona 2 weeks ago, and he said, I remember when we used to drive down Highway 1 or Highway 4 or whatever, and then with Pesky's on the other side over towards Bloomington. He said, you were related to 2/3 of the people in town. And I said, well, we kind of were. I remember, I was your dad that was a bus driver, and he said, he's related to you too?
Oh,
And
yeah.
I said, everybody is.
Yeah, no, that's what's really amazing, and like I said, I laugh about, even though the people that we weren't technically related to, but how our families tied in. And the greatest story that I have is that Mabel Moran, who was George was on the corner, Mabel and Grandma Marion were best friends, okay? Well, it turns out that Lizzie and Connie Moran, Connie Anderson later, were also best friends.
And my mother was married, you
Yep.
know, she was Moran,
So-
married to the Rhonda.
Yeah, and so, and so, unbeknownst to this kid who spends 8 years in parochial school in St. Hubert's in Chanhassen, I come back to Eden Prairie in the 9th grade, and who do I meet? I meet this girl by the name of Julie Anderson, and we became fast friends our whole lives. That's Connie's daughter. The only thing I can always tell people is, you know what, good people just pull in other good people.
Yeah.
That's all I can tell them, so.
I'll tell one more story about that cemetery. We were up there, and Mark and I, it was really hot, and on that north end, it had that cistern.
yep.
That was the best water in the world, and so some lady came up looking for grave plots. You know, we had the new section
Yes.
to the south side that didn't
Just
have
open,
trees,
yep.
and they're just opening. And so somebody was talking about lots, and so he scooted us over towards the pump to get some water. And the lady said, you know, you used to have the tin cup that hung on there. He said, drop some water for this nice lady, would you boys? So we brought it up, and I don't know what she had said when they were over there, but my grandpa was irritated about something. And she says, my hair, this water is so good. And he said, it should be, a lot of the boys' relatives are in it. She skedaddled like that. My grandpa never joked. And I said to him after we were digging the rest of the grave, and I said, Grandpa, why'd you do that? He said, you don't need to know. He never made jokes.
You got a bargain at $50. I dug him for $10.
Oh.
Homer Gay used to come
Yeah.
And he'd sit on the wagon end
Yeah.
and tell us how it wasn't straight or deep enough, or,
Well,
And
that
then-
time I dug one, you know, and I got smart, I got wised up right away. I was in there digging away, you know, and I was down about 5 feet. And the guy came out from the city with a big vault, they're gonna put it in there. He said, "How you doing, kid?" And I said, "Well, I'm down 5 feet, I gotta go one more yet." He said, "You can quit there, you can't tell us it's 6 feet or not." Okay, I'll quit.
I remember in the winter, they used to have a piece, kind of this grate, that they put, it'd be frozen, so we put it on there, we put coal in it,
Yeah.
and then we'd light it, and you had to go, keep going back up there, and make sure it was going, then we'd lift it out, and we'd dig down a half a
Yeah.
foot or 9 inches, then they'd put it back in until you hit the frost line.
Yeah. so
That
you
was
have a
not
little
as much
frost line,
fun.
yeah. And then when I started digging them, we had a shroud. And then it had one of these, what they call the weed burner torches that you would put in there. Well, then we found out that you couldn't thaw. The colder the winter seemed to get as we've gone forward here a little bit, we couldn't get it done with a smaller propane tank. So we got a 100-pound propane tank. Well, a 100-pound propane tank is nothing more than a 20-pounder taller. So it wouldn't off-gas fast enough because there wasn't enough surface area. So we had to warm up the tank. So now we have this burner on the ground with a chimney that runs up to a thing, a canister around the tank on a bench that was so feeble that you couldn't hold a 2-year-old. And we got that 100-pound tank up there, and I always thought, my God, if that thing ever falls over and breaks that out, I wonder how far that tank will go when it takes off like a rocket. But we've got a better way of doing it today. So anyway, thank you all. So appreciate your time.